Our next session is Embarcadero with Stephen Ball. Yeah, you can see your screen now. Perfect.
Brilliant. Okay. Hi, everyone. Good morning, and welcome into the session today. It's great to kind of follow on from the session with Stuart, looking at kind of Accenture and the XJS, and we're going to be diving into kind of RAD Server here, which is one of the components that's part of RAD Studio, available for Delphi and C++. And we're going to look at how we can bring some of that kind of RAD experience to data, and how we can actually serve the data out very, very quickly from your enterprise systems, ready to be consumed via a middle tier. And this is great for connecting up to things you've just seen with the data bindings in Accenture XJS, but also it's great for delivering your data out to your existing desktop applications or even mobile applications. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the architecture and setup and the whys as we go through. But I will just kind of give a quick shout out. We've been running a thing called Accenture Cafe at the start of the year, and if the Accenture XJS and the RAD Server elements are things that you find quite interesting, definitely kind of let the guys at Alfasoft know, and we'll share through some of the replays where we built end-to-end systems with the whole kind of data backend, and then the kind of the XJS top end on top as well, which has been especially great with some of the demands around COVID at the moment and trying to get people working from home. So my name's Stephen Ball. I'm the pre-sales director here at Embarcadero, and we're going to jump in. I just want to share a little bit about the company, because I mentioned a little bit about Accenture already. Both Accenture and Embarcadero are part of the developer tools division from Idera Group. It's a really exciting space around here at the moment. Some great acquisitions that have been coming in and growing the group, which is fantastic for us as developers, because we're getting exposure to some great tools and some great products, and kind of helping us do more very, very quickly. And in the context of the RAD Studio session, one of the reasons I wanted to kind of share a little bit about this was, we've got things like API layer, which is able to serve up a huge number of different data sources and endpoints. Now, rather than having to kind of code and manage each of those into your applications, being able to consume those and distribute them out through a single sign-on that we have through RAD Server is an ideal way to be able to manage those different data sources and combine them and bring them together. Because what we're seeing nowadays is that more and more we're having to connect and interface to lots of different systems for the applications we're putting together. There's a big focus around open innovation and using systems that are already pre-built to do specific functionality and binding those together in the application development we're doing, rather than building everything from scratch. And it's great to have a good chunk of that coming through. And recently this year we've also had FileStack come through, which is one of the major players in the industry behind kind of getting files uploaded and transformed and pushed forward, used widely within social media companies for kind of image protection and other kind of bits. So it's great to be able to get those kind of links in. So Embarcadero has been part of the group since 2015, and there's been a huge acceleration following some of the partner group kind of share capital stuff that was done a few years back in the group. So it's a really, really great place to have developer tools and a growing network of great stuff that's coming through. So the main kind of content really today, we're going to have a quick chat around RAD Studio and RAD Server and how the kind of two bits work together, and then we'll get straight into the demos, which we're going to be spending most of our time as we go through. So firstly, for those of you who are not familiar with RAD Studio, you might also have heard the language names for Delphi and C++, or specifically C++ Builder, with kind of the language extensions and some pretty cool stuff that we've got patents around for extending the C++ language with property method event stuff that runs really, really well through the component frameworks that we have. But RAD Studio it's an IDE. It's a fantastic IDE for building multi-platform applications. And when we say multi-platform, we're targeting Windows 32 and 64-bit. We're targeting Mac OS, Linux, iOS and Android, all from the same IDE with the same language. And everything that we do is about having it compiled down to native applications. So rather than having kind of an intermediary language like Java or .NET that is then kind of interpreted and settled down at runtime, here we are actually compiling down to the metal, which gives you full access to all the APIs, to anything on the hardware that you're running. But it also gives you blazingly fast performance because we are operating right at the level of the hardware. So this is kind of really, really cool. And what's even better is we're able to do this from a single code base as well. So when we're developing applications, not only are we creating faster and more secure applications because they are native, we're also producing them from a single code base, which means you've got reduced QA cycles, reduced testing, and everything when you're targeting multiple platforms. So it really does make a massive, massive difference. So what's great in RAD Studio? Obviously, developer productivity. Shipping really is a feature. We can develop applications at least 5 times faster, and that was when we're talking about a single platform. When you're talking about multiple platforms, you just kind of see that exponent go up even further. I mentioned fast native applications. There's certain types of applications you need to do native. Things like banking applications. You won't find a JavaScript enabled and written banking application because the security needs to be there. So that is a key thing in terms of industries that we're targeting, is that you can go anywhere. One of the other great things, and this is kind of very pertinent to the discussion today with the RAD server, is how the database access works within RAD Studio. So Delphi, the original project name for Delphi actually came from the fact that it was tightly bound to connecting to Oracle and being able to access Oracle very, very quickly. And also, for those of you who know your ancient Greek, if you wanted to get to Oracle, you went to Delphi. So even from Delphi's first initiation, which was just over 27 years ago now, it's always had a very, very strong database-focused access. And the latest controls that we have, FireDAC, which is kind of the replacement for the BDE from many, many years ago, for those of you who remember that, provides the same core functionality, the same kind of T data set, T field, all the kind of the classes have iterated through, which means that even if you've got really old projects and you want to bring them forward, it's really quick to do it. And unlike other frameworks where you might have to completely start from scratch, throw everything out and start again, the legacy of Delphi's backward compatibility is huge. And the latest database access means that we're now accessing all the latest database engines, but also the FireDAC framework is extendable. And we're seeing partners, people like CData, who are one of the leading players in the market for providing access to a broad range of enterprise systems. They're providing Delphi components and C++ builder components that allow you to connect up to things like Jira, Slack, Salesforce, Confluence, all these bits, Sage, you name it. There's a couple of hundred data sources that you can connect to, RESTful APIs that you can just work with like a data set. So just do select star from endpoint, and then update them in a database and hit the post command, and it will manage all the updates and push back through. So it's a very, very expendable framework, which is a really, really interesting thing when we start looking at the market and what's going on with bringing these different systems together and then being able to serve that data out through a uniform API like we have with RAD Server. One of the other great things with RAD Studio, I mentioned we can get to anything on the metal, but there's hundreds of C++ libraries that can be used with C++ Builder, and also with RAD Studio to be able to get into different systems and third-party hardware and stuff like that. Also, RAD Studio has always had a very strong Windows focused. the VCL is still the leading framework for Windows app development, and there's a big refocus now from Microsoft around trying to get back towards that kind of native experience for desktop applications, and with their kind of divergence away from .NET and then kind of looking at where they go now, they're a good way behind really what we can offer with the VCL for native Windows development. And there's a lot of things happening around Project Reunion, which is a kind of new Win API 3 kind of version that Microsoft are pushing out. We're at the leading edge of that, and we've been leading the market in terms of integration with things like the Microsoft Desktop Bridge and access to the Windows Store for a long time, and actually held up by Microsoft as an example of how to kind of go with those kind of things. Obviously, the visual designers are a fantastic part of what we do with the RAD experience, and being able to drag and drop and prototype very, very quickly. Your prototypes very, very quickly move from prototype to shipping. There's very few tools where wireframe designers can actually get in and use the stuff and then just hand it directly to a developer if you wanted to. But RAD Studio, you can do that, and it's fully native applications straight off. There's also a huge, strong community now, and growing. We've got a big network of tech partners and MVPs, trainers, partners like Alfasoft, who are there to support you and to kind of get you connected with what you need. I mentioned the backward compatibility and the single code base again, but it really is write once and compile everywhere. The framework and the libraries that have been written up in such a really strong object-oriented way that you code and develop with the components and with the interfaces that are available, and then that interface will then support you with the native object and instance for the platform that you're running on, and that provides huge flexibility and speed in development. So that's kind of the background of RAD Studio. So RAD Server is one of the kind of main components that we have. It's part of the Enterprise Edition and above. So we have it in the Enterprise and the Architect Edition of RAD Studio, Delphi and C++ Builder. And what it's there to do is really make multi-tier really easy. So the concept of multi-tier development is very much that you've got your data tier, your backend data, and that could be multiple different types of databases. You could be connecting to Oracle, you could be connecting to SQL Server, you could be connecting to Interbase and using things like the change view technology. You could be connecting to a number of different data sources, or even systems. And with that connectivity, what you need to do is bring that together for your application to be able to provide some features and functionality. Well, with the middle tier, in essence, what you do is you bring those different data sources together, you combine them, and then you provide an API to your middle tier. And the power of this really is about having a single sign-on. You might have different database connectivity parameters, different APIs that you're calling that again got different parameters. There might be changes to those happening on a regular basis or whatever from a security point of view. Being able to manage that all from a single point means that whatever you have connecting into your middle tier doesn't need to refresh every time there's a change to one of those backend endpoints. And then also, if you decided that you wanted to migrate from a local data source to one that was hosted in the cloud, again, having a middle tier, you can abstract that change and that transformation away from the clients and just keep them working and almost quietly do it in the back end. So to make that work, there's this concept of a MEAP, a Mobile Enterprise Application Platform. Now, a MEAP isn't just for mobile applications, but as mobile applications are becoming very, very popular, one of the reasons for having a RESTful backend server is very much around the needs of mobile networks. With traditional network development, we'd be producing applications with the client and the server running on the same network, all over a fixed wire network predominantly. You might have Wi-Fi in there, but predominantly on a fixed wire network. So you can do direct database connections very, very easily. It's a very stable network infrastructure to work on. When you start looking at today's world, and over half the devices that are connected are mobile devices to the internet now, people expect to be able to work wherever they are, whenever they are. So that could be, checking their emails before bed, or when they're on the train heading somewhere, when they're in the office, working from home, dare I say it, even potentially when they're on a plane. So having data available and accessible is kind of bringing a lot of different demands from working in the local network. Now, with a cellular network, especially as you're moving from cell tower to cell tower, your signal is going to be kind of dropping in and out. It's not stable enough to maintain a constant socket connection. So that's really where the concept of REST comes in. So with a RESTful call, you make a call to the server, you pass in the parameters and the details that you need to get the next bit of data out. So you say, right, I want to call this endpoint, which is going to give me the data from this table. I want page 1, 50 records. I want page 2, I want the next 50 records. I want page 3, the next 50 records. The RESTful server doesn't know anything about the last call you made or anything else like that. So to manage all this kind of setup, we need to be able to publish APIs. We need to be able to have access control in there. Ideally, you want to know what's happening with your API. So some analytics around it. What's being called, when's it being called. This is really important in terms of management and maintenance, and looking at what you do next. It's also really important in terms of managing kind of which APIs you are using and develop further. Getting that API analytics is a real key point to be able to make decisions around what you do moving forward. But behind it all, we need to be able to connect in to the enterprise data. And things like connection pooling is also a really useful thing to do, because you've got here people connecting in, and you're going to be connected to them for fractions of a second. 1 or 2 seconds at the most if you're serving a large data set back that's being combined from different endpoints. So the time that each user is accessing the server is actually relatively low, because the data has been connected and pushed back. So if you've got, say, 5,000 people connecting in, then you're not going to have that many concurrently connected, but you are going to have some concurrency. So having connection pooling just helps reduce the round cycle, because you don't have to start the database connection, connect to the database, do the handshakes, then run the query. Within the middle tier, you have that connection pooling happening, which will automatically set up the database connection, get that handle sorted, and then use it for the lifespan. It will manage the how long it keeps that connection open before closing it and reusing it and passing it around. And if you get multiple people coming through, multiple threads, you want to be able to have multiple threaded options working on the connection pooling. So IoT is a big thing as well at the moment. There's a lot of smart devices around. We're not going to touch into the IoT side of things with RAD Server today, but there is a strong element in there in terms of being able to manage distributed RAD server architectures, where you can be connecting to IoT devices on the edge and then being allowed to connect to them and query those devices connected into the network over Bluetooth or whatever via a central REST API, which is pretty cool. One of the other things that's quite important around this whole kind of concept of a MEAP is being able to notify clients. Because you haven't got that permanent connection, you need to be able to send a notification to the client sometimes for certain actions happening. And this is where the kind of concept of push notifications come through. Now, push notifications can be like those that you see on your mobile device. We get a ping pop up from an application saying, oh, you got a message from so-and-so, and you click on the message, and it then launches the application and takes you through to that message. That's an example of a push notification. Now, they can either be visual and they can be non-visual. They can be triggering your application to refresh and do things. Now, with the access control elements combining through, being able to register devices into the RAD server instance, you can then set up and enable push notifications to happen. So you can start sending alerts from the server side back out to the clients. And sometimes you're going to want to do this based, and certainly access into the APIs as well, is going to be based on the users and also on potential groups of users. So for example, you might have a HR group, you might have a sales group, you might have a marketing group within your organization, and then you might have a different tiers in there. So you might have the the general HR users who can query certain information, and then you might have the HR managers who can query some advanced information, maybe kind of salary details or something like that, that the normal HR people can't. So again, being able to have user and group management is kind of a key thing, and this is all built into the box. It's a bit like kind of going to a restaurant, having everything all set up, ready to go. You just need to start serving the food out, compared to having an empty building where you've got to build all the kind of infrastructure inside before you get going. That's the kind of concept with RAD Server, is it's fully loaded, ready to go. There's even a simple JSON data store included with RAD Server. It's highly secure. We use the RAD Server instance actually has an embedded version of the award-winning Interbase database embedded in. And this has full encryption at rest. The kind of encryption that you're paying, over $50,000 a site license for from SQL Server, is embedded into a RAD Server. And that's there. You can use some kind of basic JSON storage. Most people, however, will still be connecting to their enterprise databases and their existing infrastructure rather than connecting to that. But it's there to manage all the kind of the user security, the analytics, and all the other kind of bits that go with that. So I won't kind of dive in too much further into all the different features of RAD Studio, but just to say, there's a huge amount of stuff in there, things that we haven't kind of touched into, things like multi-tenancy support. So if you're deploying under an OEM kind of umbrella, where you could have each customer having their own tenancy into RAD Server, which then controls and separates out their user security and everything else like that. We have the ability to deploy out using Docker images. You can run it out onto Windows and Linux. So that's great in terms of hosting, keeping the hosting costs down. There's some samples that are shipped with RAD Studio, so you can see how to actually integrate and actively use different sign-on mechanisms. So it could be Active Directory, it could be something else that you have proprietary, maybe connected to an existing database or something. Again, you can do that. We also have integration for Swagger UI and Swagger. So Swagger is a kind of an open API documentation, and you can set properties onto the units as you build them, and it'll automatically document your applications for you as well. And there's a number of tools that will use Swagger and import it to then be able to generate client-side classes ready to go. So there's a great way to be able to share and expand out who's using the application very, very quickly. But let's get in. I want to kind of show kind of some of the bits behind the scenes here, and get into some of the demos. So here we are. This is RAD Studio, and I'm going to go ahead now and create a new application. And under the applications here, we've got RAD Server. And I'm going to create a RAD Server package. Now, this wizard here will help me go through and just get it set up and running. Now, if I've got an existing project, I could create an empty package and add it into that. And using multiple packages is quite a good way to be able to break up your data points if you're building up your API. But I'm going to create one here, a package with a resource, because I want to connect to a data set. So having a resource is a great way to go. So first of all, I'm going to give my resource a name. So I'm going to go ahead and call this data. And I'm going to use a data module here. Now, as you go through here, we can see there's the option to create some sample methods and to include API documentation, and also to connect to a data endpoint. Now, under the sample endpoints, we can see here we've got a get item. So a get returns back a list of items. The get item returns back the single item. And then we've got the post, put item, and delete item, which are basically your insert, updates, and deletes methods for calling. So with REST, you tend to have a single API path that you're going to call, and then depending on the type of HTTP verb that is used to make the request to the REST server will define the type of action that's expected of the server. So a bit like you say, right, dataset.insert, update, delete, these are being used here to do the same kind of thing. So I'm going to choose the data endpoint here, and what I'll do is I'll leave these on just so we can see what they do in the background, but we're going to ignore those and remove those in a moment. So as I go through here, within the IDE, we have a number of databases set up. You can go ahead and define in the Data Explorer a specific database that you want to use. I'm going to set here to the employee database just so we can see some data to start off. And this is showing now the tables from the employee database. So let's have a look at the customer table and the sales table. Now, what this has got done is created me a package for using in RAD Server. And we can see this is a BPL. So the way RAD Server works is we build up multiple BPLs. These are binary package libraries that we can then run with RAD Server. So the RAD Server engine itself, and this is a bit like building almost like a component that you plug into the IDE. We're using similar technology here to build our packages. And what this means is that you can build packages and then just literally push that package out to production. You can then update your the config file to say it's there, and then just restart the server, and it'll then pull up and include that package as well. Makes it very, very flexible as well, having multiple teams working and bringing and distributing different parts of a RAD server instance together at the same time. It also means that you can build stuff in both Delphi and C++, and then build those BPLs and deliver them to the same RAD server instance and actually have them load up and run together. So you can actually use multiple languages, even in the same project, using the BPL kind of technology approach, which is pretty cool. So in here, we've got one unit of code, and this unit is our very helpfully friendly named Unit 1, Data Module 1 here. So on here, we've got our database connection. We've also got our query for the customer and the sales table. So if we open this up here, we can execute, we can see the data kind of being pulled back. And we've also got this EMS dataset resource. So the dataset resource here is customers, and this one's sales. And what these are doing, these components then allow us to define on a property level if we're going to allow list, get, put, post, and delete API calls. So if we say, right, actually we don't want to be allowed any changes, we can actually just untick those, and we can just list and get. So we can get a list of all the sales, and we can get a specific item by the ID. So that's what we can do there. We've also got on here specific parameters. So we can have a page parameter name. So under a URL, we could put page equals 1, page equals 2. We can set a page size here. So I'm going to set the page size to 10. We can do sorting. So we can sort the data based on a specific value. So if we open up the sales table here, we can see we've got sales rep, we've got customer number. So we could actually do a sorting factor based on a customer number or an order date, and that will then automatically update the data coming back out of the REST API. So we've got the components. If we just have a look under the hood here, so I'll come back to this bit here in a moment, but here we can see here's the customer object, the EMS dataset resource, which is connected to the query, and we can see here this is giving a resource suffix of customer. And we named the resource data originally, so we can see we've got data customer, and we've also got data sales. So we've got the customer table and the sales table coming through here. Now, we've also got some documentation in here on the get and the get item. And so we're going to put those in as examples, and we'll come back to those later. But you can see here, if we get the test endpoint called here, it's going to provide back just a value saying data. And if we call this item here, it's going to do data and then the item. So again, I'm going to take these out because we're not going to actually use them. I just want to show that we're not actually using those endpoints, but very, very easy to be able to add in and then define additional endpoints to use and document them quickly as well. Okay, so let's go ahead and run this. So all we need to do is build and run. Now this is building up the development edition of RAD Server, which runs locally on my machine here. And you can see we've got at the top here a whole load of API points, user sign up, user login, user log out. This is all the kind of the pre-canned framework that we get with RAD Server. But we also have at the bottom here, we can see the endpoints that we have just created and published with data customer, and then an ID. So that's getting a specific customer, data customer ID for the put, the post, which is the insert, doesn't have the ID because that's generated on the server or passed in as the value, and then the delete where it passes in and takes the ID value. So we can see all of that has been documented into here for us very quickly. If we go ahead and let's just open up, don't want to open the console, let's open up a browser. And we can see this data. So here we can see this is just calling the version endpoint, which provides the version key back. Let's go ahead now and call data. And we wanted to call the employees. Or employee, wasn't it? So the error checking is all built in. You get decent reply messages. Data customer. Oh, data customer. I'm picking up the wrong table. There we go. Let's try again. And there we are. We can see the data customer has come back quite quickly here. Let's go ahead and have a look at sales. And yeah, we've got quite a bit more come back there. So we've got let's go ahead and try a sorting factor on here. Oh, actually, let's just do page equals 1. And we can see that's returned back the first page of data. So if we go ahead now and say page 2. We can see that's now pulled back a different page of data. So yeah, very, very easy to kind of get those kind of bits running. Let's have a look at using the sorting factor. So the way the sorting factor goes is we just type SF, and then if we just do cust no equals A, so we're going to do ascending. So you can see here we now got the customer numbers all in 1001, 1002, 1003. So very, very easy to quickly manipulate and change the data that we've got coming back here. And we can change that to descending as well. Okay. So let's say very, very quick and easy to expose endpoints and get that working. Now, the next thing you want to do with a RAD server instance like this is really consume it. So what we're going to look at now is how to use and consume a RAD server instance from a Delphi application. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to let's just leave this open for a moment. We've got the data customer endpoint. So one of the things that we can do here is tools, we have the REST debugger. Now, the REST debugger is great for any API that you want to use, but it's really, really good specifically for calling kind of RAD server instances locally here and getting the components that we need ready to use. So I'm going to just kind of go back here, just get my endpoint back up. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm now going to take that into the REST debugger. And I'm going to put the base part of the URL in here. And I know that's the base part, which is where we're kind of calling to, but we also want to call a specific resource. So we're going to call the data customer resource here. Okay, I seem to have a problem with my RADs, the build of my the RAD server, the REST debugger. Basically, with the REST debugger, and I can share the link over to using it. So I'm on I should have checked to make sure I was on the release build rather than one of the R&D builds that I've got on here earlier. The REST debugger, we can then kind of copy the components across, and I'll share a link through so you can see how that kind of works through. But what I'll do is let me jump into a project that I built up earlier. And yeah, it's just a shortcut to be able to copy and paste a few components that we can use to connect directly to the instance. So what I'm doing here is I'm actually going to switch over to a different database that's been built in the same way. And here we have a list of tasks. So tasks table with a task ID, a field name, and a completed. It's a really simple example. On the client side, we have got a REST client. So this is connecting to the base part of the URL. The reason it wasn't working was the RAD server instance was shut. I've just seen it. We then got the data tasks, which is the resource part that I was just popping in. And then we're able to then use this request. So we can execute this request. In fact, let's just go ahead and spin up the RAD server instance. We can execute the request to fetch data back. And you can see here we've got the data actually showing up at design time here. The response brings that data back, so we can actually see the kind of the content is in here. And we've then got this data set adapter, response data set adapter, which is converting the response JSON array into a mem table here, which is then being able to use. So we can just use this as a normal memory table in Delphi. So we can set filters on it, we can save it to file, we can do whatever we want to do with it. The only thing that comes slightly different is when we have to save the changes back to the remote server, because it's not a local database connection. We need to push those changes back. So what we're doing here on this example, we've got the fetch, which just calls the REST request to execute. We're then enabling cached updates on the FireDAC mem table. Now, the reason for that is it will then store in memory what we've deleted, what we've inserted, what we've modified. And we can then query the delta of that to be able to find what's changed and then post that back to the remote server. So under the save here, we've got this TREST data setup data. Now, this is an object that is from a sample that I've put up onto GitHub just to show how to simply do these kind of things. And it just simplifies the code a little bit. Basically, what that is doing is it's checking the kind of request that we want to do, if it's an insert, an update, or delete, and then matching it to the correct verb, and then posting it back. So it then queries the data set, finds the data with those changes, and then posts those responses back, and then updates the data set to say that it's been done. So that's very, very simply what it's doing. But by you can download the sample, this unit, and you can just drop and copy and paste it into any of your applications. You connect it to the client, so the base URL. You tell it the URL endpoint that you're using. Here we've got the memory table, but also the key field within the memory table, so we know which field to use as the parameter to send back to the API calls. So if we have a look back down here, we can see here we've got the data, tasks, and then we've got the ID being passed in where it's available. So you notice here post doesn't require one, list doesn't require one, but the other verbs do. So the constructor here will then actually, if we go and have a look, manages all of this for you, setting up the parameter onto the endpoints. Those endpoints you can update yourself on the object. If you so wish to, you can update a different endpoint if you need to provide updates to a specific API instead of the original one. So this is quite useful, especially if you've got an endpoint that you're calling that doesn't follow the standard naming conventions. And then here we're just calling apply updates from, and basically that then uses the data set and the REST query. It has all the transport built into it, and then just posts the updates back onto the remote server. So let's go ahead and spin this application up. So we can do the fetch, we can get all the data here. We can do create database. Let's take out that 42 and set that to true. And if we check our change count, we can see we've got one record change. So typically you would fire this in the back end now. So if we go ahead and save and then do a refetch, you can see that that's updated remotely. If we go back and just change this to create database Alfasoft, and then let's go ahead and create a new record in here, and we'll call this run demo. Not quite finished yet on that one. So if we now check the change count, we can see we've got 2 changes in here, but we can just use the post here to pull that back. Now, I've not got any errors being reported through. I'm just doing a simple soft catch on those. So let's go and do a fetch now, and we can see now that we've got the record and we've got the ID for that new record that's just been added on the server side as well. So pretty straightforward, really, really simple to code. But the great thing here using FireMonkey on the client side is this demo will run and compile across Windows, Mac, iOS, Android, Linux, and it's the same application to run on any platform. The only thing we need to make sure that we do is make sure that the endpoint is connected correctly. So there we are. That's pretty much it. So the last thing that I wanted to kind of show you was the analytics. I mentioned at the top that this is a really useful part of RAD Server. So we're just going to jump back in here and go to our RAD Server instance that we've got running. When we set this up, it's automatically tracking and recording what is being used from the APIs. So let's just go ahead and try and load in. So let's connect in. So we can see that I've had 20 API calls in the last 24 hours from one user. We can have a look at kind of the users we've got listed on the system in here, and we can look at the user groups. And we can also kind of drill into some of the analytics in terms of user analytics, API call endpoints, which calls have been made. So let's have a look at some of the API calls. So this is running inside a VM, so it's a little bit slow, but you can see here, this hour we've had 20 API calls. We can pick a date that we want to run for. We can also on some of these we can set up time, we want to run it for the last month or so. But it's great being able to kind of dive in and actually have a look. You can see here we can change it to month or year. We can scroll down and see which APIs have been called. So we can see here we've got the dataset resource tasks, and that's had 2 calls to the put, 4 calls to the list, 5 calls on the sales one, 6 on the customers one, 2 to get versions. So these are the event counts for each of these APIs. So very, very quick and easy to kind of get in and see exactly what's been called and when, by which user, and so on. So from an auditing capability, this is really, really useful as well. So where to go from here? We've got an info doc around RAD Server, which the guys at Alfasoft are going to be able to share out with you after the event. That includes a link to this complete guide to Embarcadero RAD Server, which was written up by David I a couple of years ago, phenomenally in-depth details. Also kind of check out the RAD Server page on the Embarcadero website. If you check out my blog, delphiaball.co.uk, and go /tag/rad-server, there's a whole host of demos and sessions there and videos, including the most recent one looking at the sample that we just had a look at the end here. Also the doc wiki, docwiki.embarcadero.com. If you search RAD Server in there, you'll be able to get into the page that takes you through all the different setups and the architecture and hierarchies and how it all works with the user groups and everything else like that. In terms of licensing for RAD Server, the RAD Server Lite is included in the Enterprise Edition and can be deployed royalty-free anywhere that you want to go. That's fully featured. It just runs a bit like the Developer Edition, so it doesn't run down the iOS or Apache, but is absolutely fine for kind of small deployments, certainly running at local sites and so on. We have single site and multi-site licenses as well. Again, these are included. There's a single site license, which is included in the Enterprise Edition, a multi-site license in the Architect Edition. And then if you're delivering this via an OEM scenario where you want the customers to own their licenses, then please have a chat with the sales guys and the guys at Alfasoft, and they'll be able to talk to you about the kind of really competitive stuff that we can do around that as well. I say if you haven't got a copy of RAD Studio already, then you can go and download the trial from the Embarcadero website. If you currently are using it and you want to upgrade, then definitely have a chat with David, Marlin, and the rest of the team at Alfasoft. There's a load of white papers on the Embarcadero website, and definitely kind of connect up on social media to keep up with all the kind of webinars and the other bits that we're running globally as we go through. So that brings me to the end today. I think we've got a few minutes still just for some Q&A, but any questions, please make sure they're in the chat.
Well, thank you, Stephen. That was a great presentation. And we actually do have some questions if you're ready to take them now.
Yeah, sure, go for it.
So is it possible to use RAD Server with load balancing?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the if I jump back a couple of slides here. So the way RAD Server works, we have the kind of the RAD Server engine, and part of that, as I said, is kind of embedded into it or deployed alongside of it is a copy of Interbase, and that provides the back-end power. So what we do is, if you want to load balance, you need to set up the Interbase server on a back licensed machine. And then you can spin up as many RAD server engines that you want. Within the configuration file, you just point it to where the license manager is, which then controls all the user security access control, manages the the recording of the API calls and everything. But the load on that is really, really minimal because the main work is being pushed out to your databases, and that's one of the kind of the key things of having the separation between the kind of the engine doing the packaging of the data sets to deliver out and back in, and then having the database engine sat behind it somewhere, or the endpoints that you're calling. So yeah, very, very easy to load balance it. It's just a case of do the installation correctly with the database server backend, and then you can load balance up as many RAD server instances as you want on the front end of that. And the RAD server console, again, you would just install that onto maybe a machine that you can access internally on the LAN, or kind of lock to whoever you want to. But that's a separate item of installation. You don't need to deploy the console with every RAD server engine.
Okay, great. Yeah. So another question here is, we have connected directly to our database for years. Would we benefit from using RAD Server?
Yeah, it's a great question. There's great benefit in having local redundancy of data, and one of the things with everybody moving to the cloud is that it takes longer to connect to the data because it's remote. So if you've been constantly connecting to your data, then keep it local, run it, and connect to it. You can actually deploy RAD Server locally near your database as well, or if you are pushing up to the cloud, then obviously you can put you could have a direct remote connection from the site, but it's going to be slow because of just speed and distance. But yeah, the benefits you'll get from having RAD Server is potentially actually deploying it alongside your existing infrastructure. So I wouldn't be in any rush to kind of throw everything that you've done away because you want to move to RAD Server instead. Keep that infrastructure you have going, but add RAD Server alongside it, and then start migrating endpoints and API calls into that for remote work. So look at the parts of your business that you want to be able to use remotely, and use that as a migration strategy to be able to offload some of those kind of things, maybe to kind of like a tablet application, or what we see a lot is if you think of we've got customers who use this for kind of like managing staff who are working remotely. So they might be going to a site, they might need to check in, they might need to take pictures of things at a site and then send those back in. Well, those are a great job to do on a mobile device, because they've got the camera, they've got the geolocation coordinates, you've got the kind of things that you want data-wise on that mobile device. So create the API points that you need to service what you need to do on that device, and have that connected into your local application, but still maintain your existing back office application running alongside it, where you've got all that heritage and that rich usability. And then over time, if you want to migrate some of that across to RAD Server, so you can start looking at deploying out towards the cloud, then you can do so. Certainly, what I'd say is with an existing application, think about how you're calling the endpoints and how you want to then structure your data to serve out, and using paging of data, because certainly when you're running on a fat client across a network, it's very easy just to select star from table and let the components manage just serving the part that you need as you need it. Whereas if you try to do the same thing on a REST call, serving a million data records over a network it's going to bottleneck up the application. So it's certainly worth considering how you manage that migration path, and strategizing how you kind of keep the two bits working together where it's practical as well.
Good, yeah. So one quick question. I think we have time for one more before we thank you for participating. So do you need to use Interbase with RAD Server?
Yeah, so the Interbase part is included within the licensing, so there's no additional cost to you for that. But it's used because it's fully encrypted. It's fully managed. We've been looking and considering opening up the backend to other databases, but from a security and a data compliance point of view, we haven't found anything that's really kind of fitted the bill in the same way with the types of deployments that a lot of our customers are looking to do. And also because of some of the licensing elements that are run through it, we still use Interbase there. But even on the light version, it uses Interbase to go. And quite honestly, some of the capabilities of what Interbase can do, it makes it a very useful tool to have in the box for a RESTful server like this anyway. But that said, you don't need to use Interbase for your data. You could be using SQL Server or Oracle or DB2 or MongoDB or whatever, and you can still connect to those using FireDAC components as you would have done in the past. and serve your data straight out through the endpoints as we've seen. So you don't need to be using Interbase for your database, but Interbase is part of the actual deployment, yes, because it's there to manage the backend servers.
Okay, great. And we're about to run out of time. So thank you, Stephen, for a perfect presentation, like you always do. And to all the participants, we will be sending out an email with a recording of this session. And also with answers to all the questions. There are some other questions that we didn't have time to take, but I guess, Stephen, if we can't answer them, if David can't, or anyone else at Alfasoft can't, we can send them to you and you can help us answer those questions, right?
Absolutely, and as always, we're here to help you. As a company, we distribute out and we sell out through our partner network globally. So if you are looking at your project at the moment, you're trying to work out what you're going to do for your roadmap and how you want to proceed ahead, then please reach out to the guys at Alfasoft. And I'm more than happy to get on a call, give you half hour, whatever you need, to talk about your plans, what you're looking to do, and provide advice around how you get the best out of the products moving forward. We're here to help you and make sure you get the best out of the tools. And we love hearing about what you're doing, so please make sure you send your story through as well.
Thank you, Stephen. And I think that's it for us for now.
Cheers, everyone. Goodbye.
Okay, bye-bye.